Good news, everyone. I see myself and I see this lovely group of panelists on the screen here to my right, which means after a couple of technical difficulties, we are up and running and live today. As we start to get everybody coming in, do us a huge favor. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We are really excited today to talk about clinical trial accessibility and how it can be redefined, how it's being redefined actively right now. I know we had a little bit of a delay to start, so I just want to jump right in. My name is Alec McChesney. I'm going to be the host for today. I am going to be the one that is kind of orchestrating the strings behind this conversation, if you will. So it is a Q&A. If you have questions for our group of panelists, throw them into the comments here. I will ask that question. We will go back and forth. But without further ado, I do want our group of panelists here to take some time, introduce yourselves, and then we'll set the table and we'll jump right into this, frankly, extremely important subject here in 2024 and beyond. So with that said, Sam, let's start with you for an introduction.
Sure. Thanks. Very excited about today's conversation. So I'm the founder of Lightship. I spend my time developing new ways for us to increase patient access and choice. And in terms of my background, I'm an epidemiologist, and I spent the first half of my career working at a public hospital called Harbor UCLA Medical Center, if anyone is familiar with it. It's in South LA. And also worked at a sort of a associated co-job away at UCLA. And really, while I was there, led a lot of research around how to improve health outcomes, how to think about better access to care in the division of infectious disease. And for the last 10 years now, just hit that decade anniversary, have spent my time really, pioneering new solutions. How do we make clinical trials more accessible for everyone? And it's been a great journey, and excited to talk more about that. So thank you.
Awesome. I love it. And as you're going through your introduction, I'm seeing all of the people that are currently watching, and we've got everywhere. We've got Bucharest, we've got London, Ontario, Chicago, Ohio. So we've got a nice crowd here today. So I'm really excited about this. Sabina, why don't we jump over to you for an introduction?
Sure. Thanks, Alec. My name is Sabina Kineen, and I'm a rare disease patient and caregiver. My family was first diagnosed with Fabry disease with my father's diagnosis back in 1984. And since then, I, along with my sisters, my daughter, several nephews, and several extended family members, were all diagnosed with Fabry. So we've been kind of living this journey for a while here. But with that, I was a clinical trial participant for 12 years, started off as a phase 2 trial participant and followed all the way through FDA approval, the FDA approval process. My daughter was on a trial, my father was on a trial. And, for the past 2 decades, really clinical trials have been a huge part of our journey. So as you can imagine, accessibility and understanding of clinical trials from the patient and caregiver view are very important to me. They're really near and dear to my heart. So I'm happy to be part of this conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're really excited to have you here and excited to hear your thoughts. Mel, let's toss it over to you.
Hi, I'm here in Atlanta, Georgia, and 29 years ago, I was diagnosed with terminal leukemia, and I was given 3 years to live. And the only possible hope was a bone marrow transplant, and I did numerous bone marrow drives all over the country. I was unable to find a bone marrow donor. I started doing clinical trials, and I traveled out to Atlanta, traveled out to Houston, Texas, to MD Anderson, and I did several trials out there. Eventually, around the 3-year mark, I entered the GLEVAC clinical trial, and I'm the world's longest living GLEVAC patient. And GLEVAC is the father of targeted medicine, and from that, a lot of other drugs have been made possible.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Mel. We're so excited to have you here today. And Allison, let's toss it to you for the last introduction, and then we'll dive in here.
Sure. So I'm Allison Rosen in Houston, Texas. I'm an 11-year colorectal cancer survivor and very, very passionate advocate about colorectal cancer, adolescent and young adult cancers, but clinical trials access. Besides being a survivor, I was worked in cancer research and clinical trials and outreach and education to make sure everyone had access to not only preventative services, but education and the importance of clinical trials and the myths that exist. And I've also participated in a few along my cancer journey. So I'm really excited about this conversation and ready to dive right in.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate, I'll say it one more time, you know, when we set out to create this with Clinical Trials for All, we were so excited to have this group here because we know how important this topic is. And so with that being said, I kind of just want to start at a high level here, looking at this 10,000 foot view. And maybe Sam, we start with you and then everybody's going to jump in. We'll go back and forth, but let's look at the 10,000 foot view of clinical trial patient accessibility and the issues that we're currently having to date.
Yeah. So when we think about, traditional clinical trials, oftentimes, they've been based around either academic medical centers or standalone clinical trial sites, that have a geographic footprint. They engage with the patients that are in their practice. It's been, really hard if you didn't have, already a relationship with that doctor to be able to even, know about, let alone participate in a clinical trial. And, I think that was kind of the basis that, people were coming from, 10 years ago when we were thinking about, how could you use telemedicine? And, I worked on a lot of rare disease trials where we would fly people in because the expert is at this medical center in one state. And so you have people coming in that you're flying in from all over the place. And so I think, from a patient awareness and just like practicality of being able to get to some of these centers has always been really challenging. And, that's, I think, the emergence of more technology and I think some, just more emphasis and orientation towards like patient-centered, how do we make it better for people, has really shifted in the last decade. And that's kind of been the biggest, I think, the highest level challenge, although there are plenty more to talk through.
Yeah, and before we bounce around, anybody want to jump in to add to Sam's answer there?
Sure. Looking at this 10,000 foot view, you see that in the past, and especially when I started, you had like the sponsor, you had the regulators, and then you had the site that Sam talked about, the academic site. For example, I went from Atlanta, Georgia to Houston, Texas. So the patient was not really about the patient at the time. The conversation often was between the sponsor and the regulators and the site coordinators. So that has like changed now, and it's more about how can we make these sites more affordable, the trials more affordable, and also what can we do about the location? Because going from Atlanta, Georgia to Houston can be prohibitive for a lot of people and stop them from even considering clinical trials. So looking at it from that bird's eye point of view, you can see that it needs to change at the patient level, where the patient, it becomes more of the center of change, and what can we do for the patient?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's where I was going next. Sabina is tossing it to you. I know you're ready to jump in.
Yeah, no, it's kind of building on what Mel was saying. I totally understand. I agree about it being more, we're finally moving more towards the truly patient-centric. I mean, let's just face it. We've heard those words for years, but how real has it been? So I feel like it has been. For many, many years, it feels like, the patient had to work around the site or the sponsors, their restrictions. And, it wasn't about the patient. It wasn't, the patient took on all the burdens. We had to make all the sacrifices from a patient or a caregiver view. So finally, I think that the sponsors and the sites are are realizing that it really is beneficial to understand the patient's burdens and understand what they need to do. I mean, the patients are the ones who are truly making the sacrifices. They're making the sacrifices with their own bodies. They're making their sacrifices with their time, their work life, their relationships, and everything. And now we see that industry is finally looking for solutions to relieve the patients of those burdens, which really makes it a win-win situation. You're going to get more patients that are able to, this whole topic is about accessibility. If you relieve those burdens, you're getting those patients able to participate.
I'm really glad that you tied this back into the accessibility. And as I was kind of preparing after our session earlier in the week, it's hard to grasp that accessibility is such a challenge, not the willingness, the education and the accessibility. And so I know we kind of touched on a couple of the key points here, but when we think about the accessibility challenges, how do these directly impact the individual patient, the individual caregiver, and really bringing it back to what matters, which is the patients and the caregivers?
I'm happy to just start, and chime in a little bit with that.
Yeah.
And we talk about accessibility. There's rural, there's urban, there's people that live all over the world, and you can't just snap your fingers and go next door to get into a clinical trial. They said they're often at these large academic centers. There's travel involved, sometimes driving, but most often there's you have to fly, you have to have a hotel, you have to have childcare, you have to take off work. I mean, there's so many challenges to get where you need to go, but everyone wants to go to the best clinical trial for them that will essentially, hopefully, better their care, save their life, prolong their life, whatever it might be. And so I think you have to address those challenges at the very beginning in the first conversation, because someone might be hesitant to join a clinical trial if they think they're going to be away from their family for 3 months. And so I think the conversation of accessibility is so important today, because it's changing. You don't have to always travel to the large academic center to be away from family. So that's a little bit about some of the challenges that have existed. And I know there's ways that Lightships and others are tackling those and, helping the patient.
Yeah.
If I may add to that.
Absolutely.
Allison, was talking about, right, those early conversations. Really, it all needs to be backed up all the way back to the trial design. And, I'm a very big proponent. I know everyone on this call is having the patient voice, the caregiver voice, right there from the beginning when you're designing a trial. Over the last 20 years, I've seen so many sponsors where they design a trial, they come out with this protocol, it goes to the IRB, they go through all of that, and then they realize that it isn't accessible to the patient. It's not a reality. Right. It's not, the patients are just, they're really wanting to be on these trials, and it's just not doable for them because of the trial design. And thankfully, as the years have progressed and in recent years, things as DCTs and such, they really is more options. The access can be there as long as the sponsor is ready to be flexible and to listen to the patients.
Yeah. Sam,
Go
ahead, Mel.
That's why location is so important, because as was mentioned just now about the caregiver, for example, I went from Atlanta to Houston, and if I go by myself, that's 1 plane ticket. But if I want a caregiver with me, that's 2 plane tickets.
Right.
And if I'm going in the summer and I have a child, then that's 3 plane tickets. So just making it from plane to it's closer where perhaps I can drive. But if you could bring it even closer to my city, my home, then I have my support team with me 100% of the time. And I think that's why location is so important.
Yeah. Sam, I feel like this is setting up, we batted around the order here to come to you for your perspective and certainly Lightship's perspective as well. So would love to hear your thoughts here.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're touching on here, the part around being able to offer choice has been really, really important. And I think even for us as an organization, a really good learning point. One of the things, as we were getting started, as a company, we really started with, telemedicine is a great option, right? Can we do visits with people just as like a check-in, a communication tool, which is, huge, being able to just connect with your study team, care team anytime. And then kind of that next step of, can we do home visits? And being able to send our research nurses to visit people where they are. And one of our learnings pretty early on is, not everyone is going to be at home. Not everyone is comfortable having someone in their home. And, the evolution of our thought had been, okay, we hear people and that makes a lot of sense. And so creating other places, people can opt in, if they want to be seen in clinic, which, either because of some of the procedures that may need to happen, or just comfortability, or they're concerned about a safety issue. Being able to do that is, incredibly helpful. Being able to be seen at home if you want to is incredibly helpful. And creating these other locations. We started with the concept of this third place, and what that's evolved into is, for what we do now, we have our mobile research units, which, for lack of a better term, is kind of a clinic on wheels. It has the look, the feel of being able to go into, a very nice like healthcare setting, but we can bring that mobile unit closer to you at your community, and you can be seen by our research nurses, our study coordinators, and do a study visit. And at the same time, one of the things we've worked to do, and I have an anecdotal example from a study the other day. We had a study participant who had originally said, could you come to my home? Could the nurse come visit me there? And then as, they kind of were getting into scheduling, realized, oh, I'm actually going to be in work at the office that day. Could you come to my office? And that's not always like a standard way of being able to visit people, but, we worked through the logistics of it, got the permissions. We were able to actually see that person on site, in a private, comfortable, safe, medically appropriate way, at their workplace. And so those are some, those are the things that we think about. How can we offer that choice? How can we make sure not only are we, supporting people and being able to take part, but also do it in a safe, comfortable, all the privacy protections way, so that we can, make sure the visit happens.
Yeah, that's great. Any other thoughts? I know we've got a couple of different areas that we're going to bounce around to, but any other thoughts after Sam went there, guys?
Well, I think that, choice it's the name of the game.
Choice.
With my experience, I did have a very good experience, and a very supportive sponsor throughout my 12 years of being on clinical trial, but I think it was a learning process for both sides. It was I look back and, I started, I think it was like 2006 or 7, started, and I, like Mel, had to do travel by flight over across many states. And like I said, I think it was a learning process, because at that point I was making these flights, and a countless number, I can't remember over the 12 years what the exact number of visits I had. But so many of them, especially towards the end, once we were in phase 3 and towards the end before approval, I was flying down there for literally a blood draw and an EKG, and maybe, get a history. My clinic visit was just one day, but at that point, I was flying at least overnight. I was missing my work. I was missing, my child's life. I started in the trial when my son was 3, ended when he was in high school. So you can imagine how much I missed. But, just to see how much it's evolved, where choice is an option. Where I could have just gone to my local lab, or say a mobile unit, that would have really made a big, big difference in that decade or plus of my life. So I'm just happy to see that there finally is more choice. They're understanding the patient's burdens, because I was fortunate. I know how lucky I was to be able to take off work, or to have that someone care for my child. But that's just not the reality for most people.
And to add to that, I think when you have a choice, and these trials are more personalized, it's all about increased quality of life. And the patient or caregiver feels like you actually care about them. You're not just another number in a trial having to travel from A, B, C, D to get where you need to go. if they're given options, and hearing this story about someone coming to work, I mean, I can't tell you how many days of work I missed. I can't tell you how many, hours of time with people that I cared about. I can't tell you how many things I missed because I had to be somewhere else for my treatment.
Right.
And so thinking about like the accessibility, that increases the quality of life, that increases the satisfaction of the patient, that just increases like the fact that they feel like you actually matter. You're not just another number. And that's huge, because throughout cancer treatment, often you have a wristband or you're a patient XYZ. You might be that on paper, but you're not when you have a choice where to go. And if it's coming to you, that's even better.
And also, if you look at it, your choice is very important. The awareness of being asked as soon as something is available at the very beginning. So to build this into the protocol, because for example, I was not made aware of clinical trials until 18 months into my diagnosis. And with a lot of diseases, especially certain cancers, the longer you are wait to get in a clinical trial, the less options that you have. Your eligibility criteria may change and so forth. Instead of taking one drug, you may have to take 2 or 3 drugs because you waited so long. So that is a part of choice, is being made aware as soon as possible. Start upstream. Don't wait till you get downstream into phase 2 or phase 3. Just, as soon as you have that hypothesis or idea, start thinking about who can I include in this trial.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much gold in this section here. And I wrote down, when you have choice, there's the quality of life. And I think it starts at the upstream, Mel, but also Sabina, as you were talking about the overnight flights and the missing this and missing that, it also comes back to just exhaustion, right? Which is just not the quality of life. And so as we talk about all of this, that patient centricity and patient accessibility, at the end of the day, it goes back to putting the patient at the forefront of all of this. And I'm curious, not only with this discussion, but the challenges that we mentioned in the beginning, how did the pandemic alter this? How did the pandemic also speed up maybe some of the changes that we were going to make on the DCT side that maybe felt like it was 10 years, 15 years down the line, and now they're sped up? How did that change the conversation, but also impact the challenges and the solutions that are being brought to the table?
Yeah, I mean, I will say during the pandemic, I love seeing things speed up and people telehealth. I mean, that was something that had existed for years, but it made things easier, and people understood. People had a fear, inherent fear to travel, to go from to even leave their house. And so the cutting the ties and all the regulatory, or speeding up the process in order to have a telehealth visit. If it's something like I need to check in on you and your symptoms, oftentimes you'd have to travel to the site.
Right.
And not having to do that and just getting on with your provider, or them even sending you devices to monitor that at home. A lot of that changed during the pandemic, which was really good and made people realize, wait, this could actually benefit us and benefit the patients. So maybe we should start implementing some of this. So I think, it opened people's eyes to things that have been very like structured before, and they were like, no, this would never work, to realize they would work, and they might actually work better.
Yeah, I would say, I also think it is a forcing mechanism, right? Allison, exactly what you're talking about. We went from this moment of, clinical trials are done a certain way, patients should come into clinic, that works best for, the traditional setup. And then during the pandemic, a lot of healthcare systems were overwhelmed. Some clinical research sites, had to ultimately shut down. They didn't have the staffing. They weren't able to even just bring people in for visits. And so it became, in conversations where we were talking to sponsors, a forcing mechanism to say, we can't operate clinical trials right now the way that we have traditionally done. We have to create new solutions. We have to think about this differently. And I think that was a real frame shift on, the planning side. Even, we saw healthcare regulations. We saw the FDA come out with more about, hey, this is how we can be flexible in this moment of great need, because, we do have a pandemic going on, but all of these clinical trials, all these patients and needs not only for, COVID trials, but everything else, right? We still had, oncology patients and trials going on and people living with cancer, and that's oftentimes, a treatment option. We saw a lot more flexibility and just like very, very quick shifts, that I think were ultimately beneficial and kind of frame shifting how we think about running studies.
Also, clinical trials became more of a household conversation because we're looking for the vaccine, and so everyone was talking about the vaccine, and there were certain misunderstandings about clinical trials. So that conversation helped in a way to make more people think about clinical trials, and also it showed certain shortcomings where, I don't have the equipment here to do this telehealth, or I get a signal where I'm at. So a lot of those issues we were able to focus more attention on. For example, with veterans, a lot of veterans did not have access to laptops and tablets or whatever. So the VA system was able to get those things to the veterans. So in a way that helped, and it lessened the burden, as mentioned before, of people overwhelming the hospital system.
Right. Sabina, I know we all kind of touched on that, but I just want to make sure before we move to the next section, any extra thoughts there?
No, I think everyone put it nicely. I always laugh because I kind of use that term COVID keeper, where, finally all those things that we've been pushing for, even if it's just like being able to work from home. I know it really doesn't have to do with being like part of a clinical trial, but the fact that being a rare disease patient or an oncology patient or any other type of patient, just having that accessibility to be able to, I begged for years to be able to work from home, and now it's much easier. So it does all those things. I think that we learned, obviously COVID is a horrible, horrible time in our lifetime here, but we did learn some things that are, it opened our eyes and opened, just our minds to these new technologies and new ways. And like Sam said, we had to break out of that traditional mind of thought, like that it was, this is how a clinical trial had to be done. This is how you could connect. You only could connect with your doctor if you went to see them face to face. So I'm glad that has changed, that has shifted in the right direction.
Yeah. One of my least favorite sayings is that's how we've always done it. Because that it's going to get us stuck in our ways and not improve and optimize. We are about at the halfway mark here. We're at 1:35 Central Time. I want to remind everybody that's watching that if you have questions, feel free to insert them into the comments here on LinkedIn, and we'll ask them of the panelists. But I did want to kind of bounce back to one thing. Mel, you said something that really caught my eye, and it was clinical trials during the pandemic became more of a household conversation because of the search for the vaccine. And I think a lot of the discussion here is about the education and awareness and the accessibility, but also the understanding that clinical trials can be a form of treatment, and understanding that from the get-go. I am getting to a question, but I'm kind of asking to everybody here, and it's a little general, but how is that a problem? How is that a problem that we can solve, or who owns that problem, right? As we talk about all the different aspects of education, what role can an individual play? What role can sites, sponsors, doctors, like how do we kind of work together to ensure that clinical trials and the fact that they're accessible or can be accessible are an option for people? Whoever wants to jump in. Mel, it looks like you're going first.
Well, it's not just an individual problem. It's not just a healthcare problem. It works across many different disciplines. So you look at the social determinants of health, and you have so many different players that are involved. From my point of view, I'm the patient advocate. From my level, I connect peer to peer. I connect in community events. I connect with sponsors and regulators. So I'm kind of like a central point for the patient. But it takes a lot of collaboration among the different players. And just you look at the laws, advocating at certain levels at the state and the capital. Those are certain things that can help.
Yeah. And I would say, I mean, this is kind of like a very broad swath, big picture idea, but
Yeah.
one of the things I think about is, even for me as a career choice, right? I ended up deciding, clinical trials are my passion, and I want to do this with my career. But I didn't know what a clinical trial was until I got to grad school.
Right.
It, and is there a world that we can ultimately create where, like, that is a part of, the health education that you learn as a kid? What is a clinical trial, and how could that help me? How could that help my family members, my loved ones? And that is one of those, like, big, that's a huge cultural shift, and a huge change in how we think about education. But that is something I think when you really want to think about big change, and how do you start to build awareness, which is hard, and it takes work from the very beginning of thinking about these things. And so when we're first, starting to talk about health and medicine, and what does that mean with, our entire population, starting that early would be amazing. And I think would do us a lot of good, and kind of, then continuing on and thinking about, what does that mean, and to an individual, to the healthcare system, to training as people move on in their careers. It's like, that's my very big giant vision of how we could make a difference there.
I love it.
And what both Sam and Mel said, I agree with. There's a negative stigma starting with starting with that. There's a negative stigma that exists out there about clinical trials, last ditch effort, you're going to die. Like, it's just, there's so much that people don't know. You're 100%. They don't know what a clinical trial is. They don't know, like, how do I figure this out? Who do I talk to? I don't think I want to do this, because that means that I'm giving up. I think the education piece, like what Mel said, community outreach, education, leveraging various channels like social media. So you're going to laugh, but I'm on TikTok talking about colorectal cancer, talking about clinical trials, talking about all sorts of different things. We go where the people are. If they're in the community, you go to the community. If they're on social media, which they are, you educate about clinical trials on social media. You start with the education, so that not only does it rest on the healthcare provider, but then the patient can be their own best advocate, and use people like the three of us as people that are clinical trial advocates. We can help navigate, we can help educate, we can help translate, because sometimes the websites that talk about trials are like very, very scientific. We help with that, but then also we empower the patient to go and ask their provider, well, I heard about this, do I qualify for this? Or so I think the education awareness piece, going where the patient is and educating about it as much as possible, so that they feel empowered that they can ask their provider, and then they have that shared decision-making conversation about what's best for them.
Yeah, yeah, I'll chime in, and it as always, we're all on the same page with this. Yeah, awareness and education are huge, and it does take, as Mel said, it's a huge collaboration across all different areas. Allison and Mel and Sam just named quite a few. Out in the community, getting to know that where the patients are. Educating. You do have to educate the primary care physicians. Again, I live in the rare disease world. We have to, people have never heard of my disease. I go to an emergency room of a large hospital, and there's no one there that ever met another patient with Fabry disease. So it's not only educating, it's educating all types of physicians, the ERs and the ER doctors, everyone about the disease, and then making those connections. But going out into the community, one thing that we haven't touched base on is being culturally aware about clinical trials, because there are many cultural communities that it's almost taboo to discuss that. Like, we don't talk about clinical trials in certain cultures, or no, we would never do that. We don't want to be guinea pigs. We don't, that's just not okay. So being just sensitive to different cultures and communities, I think is extremely important. It opens up a lot more doors. But I'm, talking about awareness and just not knowing about the clinical trials themselves. I found out about my clinical trial on everyone's favorite website, clinicaltrials.gov,
Yeah.
but I did it out of desperation. I did it because it wasn't presented to me as an option. For myself, it was actually for my father first. So I had to go and dig for it. And that's just my personality. And I had the resources. Talked about, internet connectivity. This, like Mel said, not everyone even has a laptop or a smartphone. I think we take that for granted. We just assume that that's the norm these days, but there's a whole world out there that doesn't have that. And we need to make sure that, as you said, these clinical trials are accessible to everyone. And then once they are accessible to everyone, then you have a nice wide range of diversity of those trial participants to make sure it's a really accurate trial and a successful trial.
Yeah, that was fantastic, and I think it sparked some stuff in the viewers, because we did get a couple of questions that came in specifically about this, and we kind of touched on it, so I'll give an opportunity to add anything to it. But how do patients know which trials are suitable for them and where they are being run? And I think, Sabina, with your example of that you went and searched for it, I know if I was trying to search for one right now, I would feel overwhelmed and I wouldn't know what to do. And so Sumana asked this question of, how do we know which ones are right and where are they, and find out all of that information?
One way you can do it is like with blood cancer. If you have leukemia, lymphoma, multiple myeloma, and so forth, the advocate organizations such as the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, they have their own clinical trial sessions. So you give them the information, they do the research, they come back with options that you can take to your provider and come up with a plan so that you're not overwhelmed with all this information, and they would bring it back in layman terms that you can understand. So that's one option, and that's a very good option. And I think that's where you should start, because they're going to connect you. They're going to research clinical.gov, and also, when you search, that's going to come up to clinical.gov. Clinical trials is very important.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, go towards the patient organizations. I know, again, living in the rare disease world, I rely heavily on information from my patient organizations that I'm a part of. And then for them, they're going to also reach so many people through their social media outlets. As Allison said, everyone's on some type of social media. I shouldn't say everyone, but a good majority of people, you'll reach them. And those are trusted resources. The patients trust them. They trust them a lot more than they trust a pharma company or biotech company or even their own doctor. They trust the patients that are going through the same thing as them. So if you want information about if you have a clinical trial out there and you want it to reach a lot of people, finding a trusted resource like a patient advocacy organization is really important to partner with.
And the only thing I have to add to that is there are patient groups on, so a lot of people, no matter what age you are, Facebook, there's a lot of groups on Facebook specifically for different types of cancer, different ages, different stages, different, rare diseases. So joining those groups and, advocates 100%, clinical trial finders 100%, because a lot of these advocacy organizations will curate them specifically for that type of cancer, and they'll change the wording so they're easily, understandable for the average person. But also, there's a bunch of advocates, research advocates that have gone through it, exactly what Sabina said, that have gone through it. And you say, hey, I have this stage, I have this whatever, what trials are available to me? And you'll have advocates that will be like, let me help navigate you. Patient navigators, super important with all things cancer, all things diseases, but definitely with clinical trials as well. You have a lot of resources, but I often turn to the advocacy organizations, the groups that are online. A lot of them are private because they want to keep privacy, at the forefront. But you ask to join, you fill out a form, and then you can ask, and you get a bunch of people that maybe have gone through or going through what you're going through as well. For me, I didn't, until I found my colorectal cancer community, I don't think I felt alone. So you won't feel alone when you find your community, and they'll help you with everything, especially trials.
Yeah. That word alone, it just sticks when you hear it, because that's the feeling that I am picturing across this as somebody is trying to find that. And it's a good segue into some of the concerns. And one of the questions that we got is, in your experience with talking to patients, what are some of those biggest myths that's like about clinical trials, even with the, the greater exposure that's happened over the last couple of years? What are those myths that they have, that patients have, before, going into a clinical trial, or maybe even before considering a clinical trial?
Well, I think that one of the big questions that people ask is like, what's going to happen? Well, one is, is this a treatment that's going to work? I mean, it's just a natural thing. You're about to sign a 25-page document. You feel like you're signing your life away. You're making all these sacrifices, and they're like, is this actually going to help me? And understanding that, yes, it may, or no, it may not. And we don't know. That's the whole idea of a trial. But I think just the fact that, you're in a vulnerable position. And I think that, like, understanding that is super important. And it goes back to that listening to the patient, knowing them as a whole, getting to know what their burdens are. I think that that's really the big part of it. If you want a patient to come on board and, to make the sacrifices that are needed to be a trial participant, you need to understand their burdens. So I think that that's the main point I would want to get across.
Yeah. And I think that something I mentioned earlier, people often think it's a last ditch effort. This is all I have. I have to do this. So I think that conversation about your options, because there are so many trials, it's hard to decide what will work. There's so many different phases, there's so many different drugs, so many different options. So exactly what was just said, what will work best for me at this point in time, and explaining if this trial doesn't work, there might be another one here, there might be another one here. But it's not like, there are prevention trials too. There are so many different trials. It doesn't mean you've given up. So really explaining that, and explain the historical context of trials. It wasn't, always, they weren't always great. They weren't always explained. They weren't always used in the right way. Now trials have come such a long way since the beginning. And I think, some people in the mind still have this, this understanding, or this mindset that I'm giving up. And I think educating them about that, and that there are options out there, is so important.
And another part of that is a lot of folks may think that they're going to be a guinea pig, and they're not being watched as much. But with clinical trials, you're getting the latest. You may not get the drug, the trial drug, but you're going to get standard of care, at least that is currently available. So it's not that you're not getting anything. You're getting, especially with oncology clinical trials, you're getting at least the standard of care. So you also been seen more often than you normally would. So that's a plus. In addition, you can come off the trial at any time that you want without any penalty. And I think that also needs to be emphasized. And those 2 points are very critical.
Yeah. And I think the thing, we here as an organization, when we're working with patients and participants, is also privacy. How are you going to protect my data? What happens, if I give you a blood sample, what happens to it? Where does it go? What does that mean? That I think, longstanding, conversation of concerns, but also I think even more so now, as we do collect a lot of samples, we collect people, we may get genetic samples, and what does that mean to that individual person? And alongside that, it also comes up, what about my results at the end of the study? Am I going to know what the results of those tests were? How is that going to be shared with me? Those come up as, probably 2 big topics of conversation around what does this mean for me as an individual being in this study, that I think are, really important to have worked out and be able to talk through with someone so that they feel comfortable being in a study.
Yeah.
Can I just add, just to build on what Sam
Of
just said?
course.
Just one super, super important thing to keep in mind. To answer all these questions, we really need to address, health literacy. We've all been there where we're handed this 30, 40 page document and, we have no idea what it says. And we do want all those answers. Everyone just had some really good questions, stated, but we all want those answers, but we're going to need to understand it. So, when you're designing the document and writing it, make sure it is truly, truly written. I know there's guidelines on how to write this, but and it has gotten better over the last few years. But some of these documents are just not, they're just not easy to understand for the layperson and their caregiver.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's such an important point. And it does, again, I think one more segue into a question that we just got from Kishi. The comment is, thank you for a great discussion. I couldn't agree more. And he adds, couldn't agree more. Awareness is important and empowering patients with knowledge is crucial so they can ask the physicians about trials as a potential care option. But how can we increase clinical trial awareness among practicing physicians and encourage them to include clinical trial as a care option during the initial patient discussion, kind of like Mel, you were referring to there, so it's not 18 months down the line, but right at that very beginning. Any thoughts on that question from Kishi?
You could build in certain, with technology that we have on the intake, you can build in certain things that like spark that question or prompt a doctor to just mention that. So there are certain things that you can do on that level. You can also hold educational sessions with the primary care physicians, because most likely the problem is going to surface at that level first. So you want to educate the PCPs first, and then just starting there, just to help those sessions. That's one thing you can do in the community.
Yeah, I was gonna say, the stat is, unfortunately, only 3% of physicians ever take part in clinical research, right? That's really low. So I think there's a lot of work to do to get that to a higher number. And I think, Mel, to your point, like, can we, in the healthcare system, can we build that into their clinical workflows? Can we build that into the conversation? And I do think it is that bigger picture view of the integration of healthcare and clinical trials as an option, that building that, earlier into these discussions would, I think do everyone a great service in building that awareness and being able to present clinical trials as an option for people.
I think it's interesting because I'm a big proponent. I worked at a research hospital, and I think a big proponent of education for providers should start as early as possible. So I teach medical students. I tell them my story. I talk about colorectal cancer. I talk about being a young adult going through treatment. I do talk about trials. I talk about a lot of different things. So the earlier we can educate them about all this stuff, then maybe it can be a part of the conversation from the very beginning. I mean, I agree, all the webinars, all the education, but talk to them as medical students. We don't know where they're going to end up.
Right.
But ultimately, if they hear clinical trials, then they might be a little bit more knowledgeable, and they might, bring it up. It might not be something that their patient needs right away, but it might be an option down the road. And someone should be presented with all their options at the beginning and at least be educated. So when it does come up, or if it does come up, it won't be a shock, and it won't be like, oh, well, you didn't tell me about this at the very beginning. What the explanation, having it at the beginning is so important, but educating these people before they even start seeing patients is so important.
And also secondary education, grades 6 to 12. Type of curriculum that you can put that in that kind of gets them thinking, hey, maybe this is a possible career or a major I want to pursue. You get more people involved.
I love it. We've got a couple minutes left here. I'm taking the grace period from our 5 to 6 minute delay with technology to give us 5 to 6 minutes afterwards. I know we're going to wrap up with key thoughts from everybody. I did, Sam, kind of specifically want to ask you a question regarding Lightship and some of the work that the organization is doing. You were founded pre-pandemic, 2018. You had this at the forefront. How has patient access and your efforts evolved from 2018 to now, from the beginning of the launch of the organization to where we're at today?
Yeah, I think that it's been an interesting journey. So, when we started in 2018, I think what we were doing in trying to create new solutions, how do we make trials more accessible? It was a novelty. It was an innovation project. It was an uphill battle to get that implemented in any study. And, then during COVID, it was a complete shift the opposite way. We have to do this. We have to figure it out. Let's make it work. And I think there were, we did a lot of great work, everyone, across the globe, ton of great work to make that happen for people. And then, post-pandemic as things kind of shifted back to a little bit more of normalization and things shifting, to where we are now, there was a little bit of like, okay, well, we did that in the moment because we had to. And, I think we're trying to find that balance of how do we implement solutions and make trials accessible, but at the same time, people do want to come into clinic, people may need to be seen. So it's been this, I think, kind of, trying to figure out that balance of how we do all of this and make it work, which is where we are today. At the same time, I think, culturally, technology-wise, new ideas, healthcare is always evolving. So it's this kind of, it's another fine balance of, how do we keep moving in that direction where we can do more to make it easier, make it more accessible. That I think we continue to focus on, continue to grow. And I do love that we have our team here that works with us to really help, think that through. And I think that's a part of building that journey and creating those new ideas so that we can make trials more accessible for everyone.
Yeah, that's great. Well, the last comment in here that we just got from Rodrigo is just, and I'm going to echo this, is thank you all for great insights and a great hour. So I'm going to wrap it up with one more question, and then we're going to do the 30 seconds takeaway. I'm curious, this is kind of a takeaway, and I think everybody can answer it just kind of short and sweet. And it's an unfair question to ask and have you do a short and sweet answer. But what do we think is next, right? We talk about the future. What's next for clinical trial accessibility? Where do we see this headed in 2024 and beyond? Anybody can jump in and start there.
I can
I'll just say, go ahead, Sam.
Oh. Okay. I'll do the big picture one. I think, we talk about choice, we talk about optionality. I think in today's world, it is challenging, right? How do you resource that? How do you staff it? How do you make sure you get the balance of making sure patients can take part from anywhere and access clinical trials, but make sure you have trained, available people who can do the visit with them with quality and a great patient experience. And, today that oftentimes means deciding the protocol is going to be written a certain way and people have to opt in at the beginning. And it, it may be challenging to make changes in their journey along the way or their visit type. And what we think about and what I, industry-wide would love to see is more of that ability to have true optionality, where when I'm scheduling my visit, 3 weeks in advance, I can really choose based on my current, needs, what's going on in my life, that I could go to any of these different places to do this visit in a safe way that really makes sure everything happens correctly. Lots of work to do to get there. But that's kind of the big picture where are we going and what I think would have a lot of impact in how we run studies.
Sabina, I know you might have jumped in there. Any other thoughts on that? Otherwise, we can move to the next section here, last section.
No, I think Sam covered all my thoughts.
Awesome. Well, I promised that I was going to put you all on the spot here, and so I have my my trusty timer out. What I would love is a takeaway. Allison, you mentioned something earlier about TikTok, and so I'm going to increase it to 45 seconds. And if you have, you know, a channel where people can find you, where people can see, whether that's on LinkedIn or whatever platform you use the most, please feel free to shout that out. But really, the goal here, what I love as a takeaway is, you know, what's the thing that we think we need to focus on, or what's that one aspect of this conversation that you really believe is so important moving forward. And Allison, I'm going to put you on the spot first here. And whenever you start, I'm going to hit the timer. And I'm not going to stop you at 45 seconds, but I will make a joke about how long or how short it goes. So we'll see. We'll go from there.
Love it. I love it. Well, I'm on all social media platforms. Allison Rosen, colon cancer survivor, if you look me up. But on TikTok, I have the most. It's Allison Rosen 4. So if you look me up, you'll find me. I'm dancing, talking about colon cancer, clinical trials, all things, you know, just to try to break the myth that exists. And I will probably be less than 45 seconds, because the three words that sort of resonate with me are educate, advocate, and collaborate. And I think we talked about all of those on this call today. Educate in the right way, advocate for yourself if you want, advocate for change in the healthcare system, and collaborate. Work together with organizations, institutions, companies, advocates to all make a change. And I think we're heading in that direction. We have lots of lessons we've learned along the way, and things are changing for the better, and I see it. And we just want to make sure that other people know about it, no matter where they live, no matter who they are, no matter what their income is. They all should have they should all have access to the same care.
I love it. I love it. It was 58 seconds. However, I threw the extra TikTok in there, and I absolutely love educate, advocate, and collaborate. I think that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Allison. All right, Sabina, you are on the clock whenever you are ready.
Okay. No, I just want to say how hopeful I am, and grateful. I'm grateful for the strides that have already been made in the last 20 years regarding clinical trials, and how finally, again, these like patient centricity and patient engagement, they're becoming less of buzzwords and more of reality. And that, especially when it comes to clinical trial design, I think with the FDA's new guidance and you know, requiring more, having the patient voice right from the beginning, you know, in trial design, I think it's, as I stated before, it's a really win-win situation. It is a must. It's not a, you know, nice to. We've heard that so many times. It is a have to. You must have the patient voice included in when you're designing a trial, and that's going to go a long, long way. It's going to go towards getting the trials, you know, recruitment of the patients into the trials, and it's going to go to adherence to the medications or the treatments, and it's going to, you know, follow you through. So it's just, you know, having the patient and their voice in there, designing the trial, understanding their burdens, and understanding the challenges that they face if they want to. Again, I said this before, we've all said it. Patients want to be part of a clinical trial. They're many times out of desperations, as I stated before. They're fighting for their lives, or their lives for their loved ones. So they want to be a part of it. Take down the barriers, and you know, so everyone is included. That goes for different cultures, different religions, different socioeconomic backgrounds. Think about how it's impacting. It's sometimes hard to look outside your bubble, but really, if you listen to the patients, you'll understand them, and it'll help you going forward.
I love it. The mic drop moment there was 1 minute and 45 seconds, and it was exactly what it needed to be. Sabina, the hope, the optimism, and tying this back into it's a must. This is not nice to have. It's not a want to have. It's a must that has to happen. So I really appreciate you breaking that down. All right, Mel, you're up.
Okay, so I would emphasize diversity in trial design, and I think that's very important. Also, as we move towards decentralized trials, having that option, that's going to increase more participation. Will we ever go completely DCT? I don't think so, because it's just like, if I use an analogy from a book to an ebook, you know, some people prefer ebooks, some people prefer paper books, hardback. but to have that option, that's going to help with the affordability of clinical trials. So the focus to me is to bring the clinical trial to the patient and make the patient the center of the trial. So
Yeah.
very simple words. That's where I see it as most important.
Yeah. I also love that analogy because there are days that even the person who likes the ebooks wants to read the real book as well, the tangible page turner. And so I think having that, it goes back to that choice and having those options. And you also were the closest to 45 seconds, Mel, that 52-second mark. So here we go, Sam. Final thoughts on your end.
See if I can do it. All right. So really, I mean, I think I just want to echo everything, said here around that we made a lot of evolution in the last years around making trials more accessible. There's more work to do. And I want to kind of leave everyone with the idea that, for people planning studies, this is possible. It is really, you can do it as long as you are really doing early planning. Start doing it as soon as you're thinking about your program, thinking about your study, incorporating patient voice, thinking about inclusion for everyone, so that, ultimately we all want the same thing, right? We want new therapies that will help people in need. And I think, planning early, working together, getting all the stakeholders, that's really what drives us getting there. And so as much as people can incorporate that into their work, that's what we want to do. So thank you.
I love it. That was a minute on the dot. And so I think next time when we do this again, maybe I'll adjust to 90 seconds for our final thoughts. But I also love what you just said, Sam, because I think it goes back to that must have, and that this is a non-negotiable. And as somebody who is kind of on the outside of this conversation and kind of hearing this, that education of all communities about this is so important. And on behalf of Clinical Trials for All, I just want to thank the four of you for this fantastic conversation. I hope that we have more of these down the line, because I think more and more people need to continue to hear from individuals like yourselves. So thank you so much for participating today and sharing your insights and your thoughts, but also for all the work that you do in the community. It's such a pleasure to see it and to hear it come to fruition today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
All right.